Asim, what's up, Usman?
What's up, guys?
Yeah, it's good to have you here. So, Usman, I would love to start by letting folks know who the heck you are, to what extent you want to tell your version of how you fell down the Web3 rabbit hole. I always think this is a very interesting, little case study. Like, we all have our own stories. And so rather than just diving into you'll love our new API, which is frankly, I do like a good API, but I just want to know who you are. Who's my AP guy? What was your prior life, and how the heck did you get here today?
Yeah, 100%, man. I guess kind of very similar to a lot of other people in the blockchain space. I've had kind of an unconventional story. So, funny enough, I was in university studying to be a lawyer, like had all these grand ideas of how I wanted to go to law school and tackle a lot of corruption in the world using the law. And I thought that, I like to call myself a decentralist before I even knew what decentralization was.
Hmm.
Um, so I wanted to provide more transparency to corporations, the government, etc., through the law, and I thought that was the best way to do that. And some part of me still does think that it is. Um, but I went to a very like technology heavy school, so a lot of my friends were software engineers. They were all like jumping into computer science, wanting to build like into the traditional block or in the traditional like computer science space. A lot of them wanted to be like engineers at Google. And that was kind of like the running theme around me. And then yeah, funny enough, I was also into TradFi as well in the time, so very involved with like equities, securities, things like that. And I always knew what Bitcoin and Ethereum were, but just never viewed them as anything other than like alternative asset classes. So one day I kind of fell down this rabbit hole of what is a blockchain and what does this mean for technology and what does this mean for the world going forward, right? And then the more I read, the more I started to like fall in love with this idea of transparency, individual ownership, and like bringing power back to the people. And I was like, well, this is all the kind of stuff that I really stand for, right, as a person. And so in true degen web3 fashion, I really abandoned everything that I was doing, and I was like,
I saw some things I liked about the space, so I completely threw away my life plan.
yeah, literally, I was like, okay, yeah, LSAT, what is that? I don't know.
LSAT, more like goodbye.
Yeah, I closed the books immediately and was like, okay, I'm gonna jump into learning what blockchain is and learning. Like I'd never coded a day in my life.
Sharp left turn for sure.
100%, man. And it was
Wow,
it was cool. It was
I
honestly one of
respect
the
it.
best decisions I've made in my life.
Yeah.
Looking back on it now, right?
Can I ask when was that?
This was about 2 years ago, or two
Mm.
and a half years ago.
Yep, we're all that 2020 cohort. 2020 bull run brought a lot of new blood into the space for sure.
100%, and it was scary because like all my friends and family were like, "Oh my gosh, you're gonna jump into crypto of all things, right?" And it was like, well, I'm actually here for blockchain, and this is what is beyond crypto. But then I realized that two things go hand in hand, and I went down the rabbit hole, went down the engineering rabbit hole, taught myself or tried to teach myself Solidity right off the bat, which I realized was probably one of the dumbest mistakes I could have made to jump into, coming with no programming experience.
Right, right.
So then I, went down the traditional CS rabbit hole where it was like, okay, HTML, CSS, JavaScript,
Mm,
learn
hmm.
how to build projects, learn how to do front end development, and then I jumped back to Solidity. And then by the time I did jump back, thankfully there were a lot more resources out there than there were when I first started. And so like things like Build Space were out there, things like Rabbit Hole, like really cool platforms were really starting to get their legs and start to showcase how to educate developers. I started creating projects on the side, having fun. Really, really cool as well. I realized that my university had a blockchain club. Funny enough, and it was something I had no idea about. There was probably like 6 or 7, maybe max like 10 people who were active in the club at the time. And then I joined, and then things just took off from there, where we started doing hosting workshops, partnering with all these different companies. We did some chain link events, and I finally found my group of people, if that made sense,
Hmm.
right? Where it was
Hmm.
like, okay, now I have this community. I am this is not just me in the back of my room watching these tutorials every day, um, thinking that this industry exists when it's all in my head, right? When in reality,
Hmm.
it's okay, this is real life. And just being surrounded by people who are smarter than me, that kind of got me some engineering experience on the side. Eventually, I got my first job at a blockchain startup, which they were doing something really nascent. It was digital to physical NFTs for clothing. So essentially, just authenticating clothing using NFTs and things like that, which was looking back on it, just another nascent idea in the industry, but it was really exciting to me because I got my first experience writing production level code and seeing what that means to be in like a real environment, being a real software engineer, having deadlines and things like that. Um, did that for a couple months. Then I got introduced to a friend of mine from the blockchain club who was starting his own project called Sugar Block, and this was something really exciting to me because at the end of the day, the reason I joined this space was to help people, right? Provide transparency, provide ownership, like this whole idea of fixing a lot of the issues that are present within the traditional internet. And Sugar Block, what they were doing was providing more transparency to the 501c nonprofit donation space. So essentially, right now, when you donate money to nonprofits, you don't know where that money exactly goes, who's receiving it, what they're using it for, like to a certain extent, right? And so we want to provide more transparency there. Do some, bounty work where now nonprofits could post jobs and people could satisfy them. So another experience writing production level code. Really loved the project. Enjoyed my time there. Got a lot of experience, and then I went to my first conference in about June of last year, which was Consensus, and got introduced to the head of growth at Chainstack. He really liked me and really thought that I would be perfect for the DevRel job. And from there, that's where I've been. And been like 9 months now.
Congrats. A lot of twists and turns along the way. That's a
100%.
wild story. I heard not at all having a CS background. I heard some values alignment once you started learning about the blockchain technology and what it might allow you to accomplish with transparency that you were thinking would happen at a policy level and wanted to explore this as maybe an alternative version of a similar idea. And then just diving into like Solidity. Okay, too hard. What about HTML and CSS and JavaScript? Okay, I'm front end. Okay, I'm hired. Okay, now I'm hired at a different thing. Now I'm doing my pull requests. We're doing code reviews. We're talking merge domain. And you're like learning the software engineer thing. And that's all been about 2 years. You like clock it at 2 years, like all the beats of that story.
Yep.
That's wild. So the reason I wanted to start there is that um, ETH Denver and SporkDAO, we have this like community. It's completely centered on biddling, right? It's about creating things with our own two hands together. And the two most important parts of our community are education, so we can help each other know more and we can create, yeah, just like sharpen our skills basically. And then the community itself and how we coordinate with each other. So I appreciate having you on because explaining anything is useful. Like truly the process of getting a little deeper in the space and just even being conversational in some of these pieces, even if like we got Andre here in the chat. What's up, Andre? Good to see you. Andre is inspired by your story. And I think that not just your story's cool, part of why they're important to me is that software development, especially for exactly your story and exactly my story and countless others like us, where you're coming self-taught from left field, not a CS background, it's super hard. It's super fucking hard. And then you're like, damn, like I'm trying to do this tutorial and I feel like a scrub because I'm on step 1, which is npm install whatever, and I don't even have npm yet. And the tutorial doesn't explain what the hell npm is. Like they're assuming I know. This is meant to be like, oh, this is the most basic tutorial. I'm calling out Nader Dabit. His full stack tutorial got me into the space, but to even get to step 2 of his tutorial, there were like 10 steps because I didn't have VS Code. I didn't have NPM yet. It was literally the first thing I'd ever done. So I wanted to acknowledge that you've been climbing a mountain with some support along the way, right? From the blockchain club community, from your friend that hooked it up with some of these opportunities. So nobody does it alone, in other words. And maybe we can shift gears here. What do you want to help share? Because I think it's always a beautiful moment when we get to share some of our information with each other. We all have things to learn from each other, truly. What do you want to share with us today? What are we going to learn about?
Yeah, 100%. So I guess for the past 9 months, I've been delving into every nook and cranny of this industry. I work at a blockchain infrastructure company, so we get to see literally everything, right? From all protocols, all the different technologies being built, all the different projects being built on top of, all the different blockchains. So I feel like I have a pretty good idea of what I like and what I don't, what I think is going to be successful, what I think is powerful in the industry. So today I have this presentation that I've been giving for a while where it's all about Avalanche subnets. And once I delve into it, you're going to see why I really value Avalanche subnets as a whole and what they're going to be doing for the industry going forward, and how they're going to propel us to that next level of being a real deal industry that's taken seriously.
Okay. I would love to frame before we dive in, because you've given this before, and so with a bit of a twist, please treat us, the people listening to you, as intelligent folks that might have no idea some of these terms you're using. Exactly like I was saying with NPM install. We had an amazing DevRel guy, Al, on from Alchemy. Shout outs to Alchemy University that he's working on. And as we were going through some of the like screen share stuff, he was like, so this is NPM install, and here's what that means. And I was like, that's exactly it, Al. So we are looking for make no assumptions, right? I'll start us off. Avalanche, I've heard of that. That's like an alt layer 1. I think their C chain is EVM compatible, but then it gets really complicated really fast. And I kind of think of it like Cosmos, where there's like a bunch of stuff going on and I don't really understand it. So that's what I'm bringing as my like audience surrogate perspective. And I'll let you like sort of brush us up on what is Avalanche and what role do subnets play in the context of the ecosystem.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. And I think you're going to enjoy this presentation because I made it hopefully very beginner friendly. So I think that everyone should be able to kind of follow along.
Yeah.
And if not, I'll be able to pick them up along the way.
Yeah. As you go ahead and share your screen, I want to give some shout outs. Hi, Beam, if you're still here. Also, Brett, good to see you. Is anyone else here? Let's get some GMs in the chat. I always like to know who y'all are tuning in day after day after day. Because then I can start. Oh, man, yesterday, actually it was Tuesday smart contract. We were working through Patrick Collins' 32-hour course, one byte at a time. And I was getting some code help from chat and ended up sending a very useful member of the community some spork. I was like, thank you so much for helping me debug. Debugging sucks. And we just crowdsourced it. Oh, it's Gina. Hi, Gina. Oh, Praying Daily's here. Welcome back. We're teaching young minds every day. Every day except Mondays. We take Mondays off.
I think my permissions aren't there yet.
What?
To share.
That might be a browser thing.
Oh,
because normally so it's like there's the mute and then there's the video thing and then there's the share screen, and you feel free to talk out loud. If you click it, is it throwing an error or something? What's up, Suede? Welcome back, Suede. Suede, I heard you got dialed in as one of the crew. Is that true? We're giving you a lot of responsibility this year. I saw your name over on the internal Slack. It's okay if the struggle is real, Usman. Just let me know.
Yeah, see, this is the new software engineer coming into play right here.
Yeah, I mean, it's talk about abstraction. Behind the scenes, y'all, we're using a platform called Restream to help make the stream possible. Shout outs to Restream. And they use a lot of abstraction. This is one of those like simple GUIs. Like this is not a Photoshop. This is like a Canva kind of a thing. And along the way, whenever you do abstraction, whether we're talking about Restream here or Canva, or like if you're working in React instead of JavaScript, on the one hand, sometimes you can be more concise. And on the other hand, goodbye? You almost had it. I don't know. It was there and then it went away. On the other hand, sometimes you got to like learn a couple specific tricks. And if you don't know the specific trick, like, oh, in React, you need to manage state with hooks. It's like, well, if you don't know about hooks, you're just dead in the water. But once you know about hooks, you're like, okay, fine. I got to bend over backwards to manage state. Thanks, React. Congrats, Suede. Meta Steward for Biddle Week. That is a huge position. Stoked to see what y'all do. Biddle Week team is growing big and mighty. What's up, Usman?
Sorry, this is...
You're good. I'm not in a rush. I get to chit-chat with chat. That's my favorite part of the day. Question for the room. Twitch is nice. Usman and I are beautiful, handsome men. Sure, everything's fine. But would it be better to do these in Discord? Okay, we can still screen share, but we can talk to each other. Or maybe even Twitter Spaces? Do we like Twitter Space idea? I'm going to put us down here. There we go.
How's that looking?
Oh, looking real good.
Nice.
Yeah, and then if you want to try the, I don't know where like the full screen button is or whatever. Okay.
All right.
Almost. Yeah, looking good.
Looking good. Alrighty, guys. So we are gonna get started then. We got
Yeah, you glitched for like half a second. I'm gonna wait for your video to catch up because I can hear you and your cursor's good, but your face froze. I wonder if it's a full screen thing, or if it's just your upload
let's
speed
see.
and the struggle is real.
It could be both, honestly.
I mean, your audio is clear, so go for it, and I'll let you know if anything weird happens.
Okay, here. Let me try one last time. I just want to make sure everything is good before we start.
Sure. Okay.
But
Muting you for a second because you got the double.
please.
You got the double going. All right. Boom.
Right now you can see me.
RIP headphone users.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry. Y'all are done. Don't worry. You'll see blood trickling down the side of my face as we continue. Appreciate the feedback, Andre.
You know what it is? So I'm using this really cool new browser. It's called Arc. I'm not too sure if you guys are familiar with it. So I usually typically use Brave, but
Okay.
one of my someone that I know in the industry, they released this new browser. It's called Arc. Really cool. It's like a new, it's like a Chrome competitor, you could say, and they're trying to change the way that browser functionalities work. They're trying to be a little bit more concise. I've been playing around with it and I really like it. But here's where the issues come in, right? Can you see the screen now?
I can see the screen. Try going one slide forward. Okay, now try going one slide back. All right, we're good. And try raising your hand. No, your video froze again. Are you still in Arc or did you switch back to Brave?
I went to Arc. Oh, I was at Brave right before this one was working.
Okay.
Back to Arc right now.
I'm going to blame your upload speed, but it is not a problem.
All right, I guess we're gonna to get things kicked off. So we don't kill too much of anyone's time. I'm going to be talking about Avalanche subnets here today, and this is one of my favorite new developments in the industry right now. But before we get started into that, I'm going to give a little insight as to where I work and who I am. So my name is Usman. I work at Chainstack, which is a blockchain infrastructure platform. At the end of the day, blockchain infrastructure just means that we like to power all the apps on the back end of every single app that you see and get to play with around in the industry today. So, for example, we deal with a lot of things called RPC nodes. At the end of the day, all that means is that actually, before I even go into that, who here knows what an RPC node is? Maybe throw some Fs in the chat.
Oh, we covered this one on one of the Tuesday smart contract things. What does RPC stand for? I want to know if anyone could tell. And no searching it. Just give me your wrong answers. What does RPC stand for? I'm going to go with remote personal controller. I think that's a pretty good guess. Remote procedure call. Of course, beam me up now. I'm going to assume that's correct, Usman?
Yes, it is.
All right. Beam me up now is our local expert. Appreciate you, Beam.
All right, that's amazing. So I'm glad that everyone knows what RPC stands for, because at the end of the day, every project that has the name blockchain in it needs an RPC provider in the backend to make sure that those calls are being satisfied. So let's say you buy your NFT, you're trading on your favorite DEX. To make sure that that transaction goes through, when you click that sign button on MetaMask, it needs to go through some RPC endpoint in the middle to make sure that that request is sent to the overall blockchain network and then propagated on the actual chain. So that's what we do at Chainstack. We like to provide these RPC endpoints for a number of different chains. We support like 18 different chains right now, growing every month. And we do a lot of other cool things, but mainly we like to stick in the infrastructure space. When it comes to me specifically on the DevRel side, since we happen to manage so many different protocols, you can imagine that all these different protocols have their own unique technologies that they're building. They have all these unique features, and they're all different than each other for the most part, right? Like, so if Polygon, they have so many really cool things that they're working on with Polygon Edge, Polygon ID, ZK EVM, Starknet, Starkware, all these different really cool protocols. They're all unique in their own fashion. For me, I tend to focus on Avalanche, Arbitrum, and a few other protocols, but Avalanche and Arbitrum namely. And when it comes to Avalanche specifically, I want to give a precursor to everyone who might not be familiar with it. So, Avalanche, what their goal is to build something called the Internet of Finance. And what that means is essentially that Avalanche wants to be the leading blockchain platform for the tokenization of assets, for the building of infrastructure, for anything blockchain related. They want you to do that on Avalanche, kind of like any other blockchain does, right? But they have a few things that really allow them to propel them forward to make them that platform to be to do so. So the way I really like to look at it is Bitcoin introduced blockchain 1.0, right? Bitcoin introduced the idea that we can have self-sovereign currency powered by this idea of a blockchain where everyone owns their currency. It's completely decentralized, completely publicly transparent while also being private, um, and gave really power back to the people in the form of currency. Then Ethereum took that one step forward with blockchain 2.0 and introduced this idea of programmability on the blockchain, where now individual developers who had all these crazy app ideas could now utilize all the cool features that Bitcoin gave them and allow them to program that on top of a blockchain. So that's where we saw really cool applications start to come out with things like Uniswap, things like ENS, and a whole other number of different cool applications that wouldn't be possible if it weren't for this programmability that was introduced by Ethereum. But one thing that we saw when it came to Ethereum was that there were a lot of different problems that were introduced with it as well. So when it comes to the traditional internet currently, if you go onto Twitter, you go onto YouTube, you go into some of your favorite websites and apps, you're not going to really feel any sort of friction when you're using them for the most part, right? If you post a tweet, usually it's posted pretty instantly. If you post a tweet, it's not going to cost you anything to post a tweet besides your time. And if you watch a YouTube video, it's not like it's taking you minutes before you click that post button for that thing to be posted or watched as well. But the problem with Ethereum is that it's a blockchain that is typically pretty slow, and it is pretty expensive as well. So usually when large amounts of individuals are using a platform like Ethereum or using different applications built on top of that blockchain, the network gets congested, causing it to get slow for things to propagate on the blockchain through those RPCs that we talked about earlier, and it becomes expensive due to the amount of people who are using the network. So there's so many different solutions out there that are trying to tackle this issue, whether that's layer twos, whether that's alternative blockchains, or whether that's anything else in between, right? Where a lot of people are trying to solve the scaling issue that comes with Ethereum. But Avalanche, the way I look at it, and this is all my personal opinion, is Avalanche is blockchain 3.0, where Avalanche takes the beauty that was introduced with Ethereum and Bitcoin and takes it one step further by addressing it with addressing all the issues that were found in it as well, and creating this new succinct blockchain platform where developers can build blockchain applications with reduced friction that was given to them by Ethereum. So you're going to ask, how does that possible? What makes it different? Well, let's jump into it.
How is that possible? What makes it different?
It's the first question that I always get whenever I like to show my favorite platforms to build on. And first and foremost, before I even get started, I like to say that I'm a builder, right? So like while I am working in the industry, while I am doing all this from a high level perspective, at the end of the day, I got into this industry for building, right? So I usually like to talk about platforms where I would build myself, right? And that give me functionalities that I like to build with myself. So one of the biggest breakthroughs in blockchain as in general is this idea of consensus, where now individuals all across the world, all on their own different platforms, can come to agreement on one specific transaction or one specific, event occurring on this blockchain to make sure that it is true. And then that's what creates this idea of trustless technology. And so with traditional classical consensus that was introduced to us by Bitcoin and Ethereum, we were given this idea of decentralization. We were given this idea of high throughput, and sustainability. And so one thing that was highly lacking, like I mentioned earlier, was the speed to finality and the costs that are associated with it. Because if you have consensus that takes, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes to occur, in that 10, 15-minute period, so many things could happen, and so many new events could occur, that when that block is published, that block is now already outdated. So for us as developers, for us as users of blockchain, we need consensus that is fast and nearly instant. So what's really cool about Avalanche is that they use this new consensus model called Snowman consensus. And Snowman consensus was coined the biggest consensus breakthrough since Nakamoto, right? And that's due to the fact that it is ability to power sub-second immutable finality. What that means is that once something is propagated onto the blockchain, it is propagated within 1 second. And once that is propagated, it's immutable, meaning it cannot be changed. So whereas with traditional consensus, you have to wait long periods of time before you get that immutable finality. The beauty with Avalanche is that it's instant. So that is one thing that sets it apart already from Ethereum and a lot of other blockchains that we get to see today. So it achieves this by something called repeated subsampling. And so, don't worry, I won't get too nitty gritty into the idea of what it means, but essentially what this allows for, what repeated subsampling is that it allows for the network to come into consensus by pinging all the different nodes within the ecosystem to come into agreement without having without having maximum overhead like a lot of these other blockchains do. So at the end of the day, when you're trying to ping all these different nodes in the network to be able to come into agreement on a certain transaction, not only does that cost a lot of money, not only is that very slow, and not only is that compute intensive, it creates for a very non-robust environment that we need as developers to be able to achieve similar experiences that we get when we use traditional Web 2 applications like Twitter or YouTube. But with this repeated subsampling, we get to achieve this sub-second immutable finality that gives us similar developer experiences that we would get if we were on such platforms.
Um, Question
Yes, go ahead.
and request. Request, please flick your chime to not blow out my eardrums mode. Your
Sorry
text
about
sound.
that.
No, you are forgiven. It's just a request. And the question, just to make sure I'm understanding so far, is you're telling me that the main difference between Avalanche consensus mechanism, the Snowman, consensus mechanism, and how things are done on the Ethereum network, for example, currently, is that we're looking for a subset of randomly chosen validators to agree on including the transaction rather than all of them, or I'm not an expert on how validation's done, but it looks like the key performance improvement comes from simply pinging fewer validators about it for each transaction. And that's where we get the speed increase.
Right. So you ping the nodes that are closest to your network, then that creates a larger ping to the nodes that are surrounding. So if you're able to ping the nodes in your surrounding network and they come into agreement, then that larger agreement is able to ping nodes that are farther away that are doing the same thing in their local zones. And then they can all come to agreement that, hey, we agreed on all of it, the same thing here. We also agreed on that here. Now we can come into agreement together as well.
Huh. Interesting. Okay.
And so what that creates for is a scalable, secure, and flexible, sustainable environment, which really is the base layer of Avalanche, right? And so the way I like to look at Avalanche, before we even jump into the virtual machine side, before we even jump into all the different stuff that is built on top of it, is that Avalanche consensus is truly the most robust consensus that we have in the industry today, based upon its speed and based upon the finality that it's able to provide. Now, if you take that and you were to plug it into Ethereum, you would have a really, really powerful, blockchain development platform. But what comes with Avalanche is, on top of that consensus model lies the Avalanche primary network. And so this primary network is essentially what a traditional blockchain needs to be able to function, but split up into three different parts. So this is the first example of a subnet architecture that we're going to see that I'm going to delve into much deeper in a bit. But just to give you a brief understanding, Avalanche's primary network is split up into three different subnetworks that are all responsible for their own purposes, their own functionalities, and they also house their own consensus mechanisms um, that are key to those specific functionalities that they have. So, for example, the X chain, which is the exchange change, is essentially responsible for things like bridges, things like being able to connect to different blockchain ecosystems. And with that chain, the Avalanche consensus protocol is what's best used for that one. And so that's very different from the Snowman consensus that we just went about. Um, and the reason for that is just because that's more catered towards exchanging of assets and creation of assets as well. Then we have the platform chain or the P chain, which is responsible for managing validators, creating future subnets, which we'll discuss in a bit, and then actually maintaining the network state. And in that regard, Snowman consensus is being used, the one that we just talked about. And then we have the one that's most known, which is the contract chain or the C chain. And on this chain is essentially smart contract execution. This is where people build their dApps, build their NFT protocols, DeFi protocols, novel dApps, games, things like that. They're all usually built on the C chain because it's EVM compatible, right? This is where you as a developer can plug and play your Solidity code that you were playing on Ethereum, take it to Avalanche, publish it on the C chain, and have a dApp that would work the same way it would work on Ethereum, but just with this new sub-second immutable finality. So today, most of these dApps do live on the C chain. The reason for that is because it's fast, it's easy, and it's EVM compatible. But very similarly with any other blockchain, when projects start to see scale, the overall network starts to become more congested, leading it to become more expensive and slow. So that's not a problem that's unique to just Ethereum, but that's a problem that you would see on Avalanche as well on the C chain where most dApps are deployed, right? So consensus doesn't solve that; it just makes it a better development experience. So when Avalanche was faced with this issue, they introduced a solution as subnets, right? And so, what is a subnet? So, if we go back a little bit right here to this graph that we have, the novel idea of a subnet is that each application that starts to see scale and starts to see um, large transaction throughput and starts to take heavy load on the C chain would now be able to redirect that transaction throughput onto their own blockchain that is built on top of the Avalanche network. So they would basically be able to have their own blockchain, kind of very similar to a Cosmos-esque environment. Um, and so these chains would be built and attached off of the P chain right here, and then kind of built into their own custom chain.
Is it accurate to describe the way state is handled in Avalanche? Like, because we got the X chain, the P chain, the C chain. On mainnet, if I wanted to explain to somebody how a layer 2 works and how it inherits the security guarantees of ETH mainnet layer 1, I would say, well, they do a bunch of computation, and rather than doing all the computation, they just store the result, the outcome of that computation. And it's basically a smart contract on ETH mainnet. Like the entire rollup ecosystem, like ZK Sync, is itself on ETH mainnet. And then it's this like skyscraper on New York analogy, right? Like we're still on ETH mainnet, but now we've gone higher. So I'm curious as we start to talk about these custom chains on the P chain, the platform chain, are they separate or parallel to the C chain? Are all three of these somehow getting settled on some main thing? I don't really understand the structure of the network, and I'm happy to punt that question to later when you give me more context.
Yeah, I think when we go a little bit later, you get a little bit more context. But
Okay.
before we get there, I can so the way I like to think about it, and if you can see like visualization with my mouse here, um, the way
I
I like to
cannot.
think about it is,
There we go.
Imagine a circle, right? And this is the Avalanche primary network.
Okay.
We have at least a primary seed chain. On here, we have all the dApps that live on Avalanche. They're all, we have Dex 1, NFT Marketplace 2, dApp 3, dApp 4, etc.
Uh-huh.
Now these dApps start to see high throughput. Now they need their own subnet. So now, boom, external chain, right? Or boom, another chain right here. Boom,
Uh-huh.
another chain. And so now you're starting to see the circle with having these external chains kind of drawn off from the center. And the goal is for all these chains to be interconnected. So I'm definitely going to dive into that in a bit, but I hope that provides a small answer to your question, or at least
It
some.
does. Yeah, it begins to. Yeah. I appreciate the visual metaphor.
Of course. um, so yeah, essentially, Avalanche, these subnets allow projects to redirect that network traffic away from the chain onto their own unique set of validators. Now, this is very key because what you mentioned with layer twos and what you mentioned with the scaling solutions that they themselves have, the problem with that is that they typically house very small hand selected numbers of validators, right? And when you want your own app chain, the whole purpose is to redirect network traffic away. And if you're using the same validators, or if you're propagating those transactions to the same validators or propagating the main network, it's going to continue to cause heavy network traffic. But when you have your own unique set of validators, you're allowing the main network to remain robust, and you're allowed to actually control your chain in a much more customizable way than you would if you were having to deal with the limitations of the main chain.
But I mean, like, let's say one of the examples of a dApp that's getting this high throughput and wants to pursue this type of solution is like DeFi Protocol 1, which is like Uniswap. I mean, frankly, SushiSwap is a little more infamous for copy pasting itself onto all the platforms. So we'll be more intellectually honest. SushiSwap's like, of course we're going to deploy on Avalanche seed chain. Somebody else is going to do it too. We might as well be there. They do it. Now suddenly they're the biggest dApp in the land. I know Trader Joe's happens to be also popular on Avalanche, and boom, throughput. Oh no, congestion on the network. All L1s eventually get these high gases as they get popular. What are we going to do? If the solution is we'll go make the SushiSwap subnet and we're going to have higher scalability in exchange for less decentralization because now we have this different set of validators. Well, didn't we just throw decentralization out of the window because we just like got 6 SushiSwap people like running their own nodes or whatever, and we're just Binance Smart Chain all over again? So, am I missing something, or is this kind of a trade-off that we're intentionally choosing to make as we like try to optimize for scalability?
Well, the beautiful part is that you can share validators, right? At
Okay.
the end of the day. So now the goal is that, and I'll get into this in a bit,
Mm-hmm.
anyone building any solution that they want can build it the way they want. So if you want to be able to build a fully decentralized system that is permissionless, that has no ties to centralization at all, you can
Mm-hmm.
do so. You can use infinitely scalable validators to be able to do so. The same way that if you're an institution who's building high level enterprise grade stuff that needs KYC and AML requirements, you can build that exact same way as well. So that's the kind of flexibility that this kind of solution would
I see.
allow for,
I see.
versus if I were to tell you that, hey, if you're building an app chain, you have to only use your own set of validators. Or, hey, if you're not building an app chain, you have to stick to the main set of validators that are on the C chain or on Ethereum mainnet. Um, so you as a developer get to decide, and that's one of the best selling points for me as a developer. But I'm going to definitely get into that a little bit more in detail in a bit.
Cool.
Um, Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it's this overlapping thing that I think is the key difference that sort of answers the paradox I'm getting at. I'm curious how the validators can sort of opt into supporting several subnets or one or multiple. So I'll let you keep going.
Definitely. Well, before we get into that, on a base layer, the solution just allows apps to be able to give their subnets higher throughput, faster processing speeds, and again, full control of those validators. So on just a scaling side, I'm sorry about that again.
You're killing me, Usman.
That's my dad texting me.
Dad, I'm streaming. You always text me when I'm streaming.
Exactly. Um,
My senses were tingling for sure.
but on a base layer of scaling, Avalanche is one of the best scaling solutions out there today by the subnet way, right? By the subnet
Mm.
solution we just discussed.
Mm-hmm.
So on just scaling, it does a pretty good job by being able to take away transaction throughput from the main chain onto these dynamic set of validators.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like you were kind of hinting to, so what, right? This is just another layer one, just another scaling solution, just another app chain solution, right? What really makes it different? What's really the call to action here? Um, and this is where things get really exciting. So Avalanche are actually much more than just a scaling solution. They're what I like to think of as a giant umbrella where literally anyone can deploy their own fully custom blockchain. And I really want you to hone in on this fully custom aspect, um, because this umbrella has full customization built into its architecture, being able to power literally any use case imaginable. And I really try not to exaggerate when I say this, but it is truly the most customizable blockchain solution out there today, away from you launching up your own layer one, right, which has its own headwinds. So, how does it do that? Well, for the first reasoning is that Avalanche released something called BAMF. And so this was the subnet theory was coined when Avalanche was first founded, 4 or 5 years ago. But it was all theory going forward, right? Anyone can spin up their own subnet. Anyone can have full customizability of what they want to build. But we hadn't gotten that concrete ability to be able to do so. And very recently, this happened just at the tail end of last year. Avalanche released something called BAMF,
For
which is
folks who don't know, it's named after Banff National Park, which is in Alberta, Canada. That's why there's a beautiful mountain scene there.
100%, and it goes well with the idea of avalanche, right? Like
Aha, I see.
Yeah, I think their marketing team is very clever when they did that. I was like, damn.
Yosemite was taken. Yeah, it
Yeah,
doesn't have
Yosemite was.
avalanches.
Who knows? That might be next, right? Or
Sure.
The Rockies might be coming up.
Oh, that would be good.
Himalaya, right? Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Essentially, what this allows for is now individuals have the ability to elastically create their own set of validators, right? Essentially, what that means is that before, when you would have to go to build your own subnet, you'd have to go to Avalanche, knock on the door, and be like, "Hey, I want to launch a subnet, and create. Can I be approved to have certain sets of validators, things like that?" Now today, if I have the required stake amount, I can go and launch my own subnet with my own dynamic set of validators, completely permissionless, right? And now this is where this idea of permissionless building comes into play. Another thing that BAMF introduced was C-chain token support. So now what's really cool about subnets in general is that it really provides utility for a lot of tokens that we have within an ecosystem, right? So if, let's say, you're a Uniswap, for example, and you want gas to be burned in Uni tokens, you can't really do that today on Ethereum mainnet. You can't have each transaction that you sign be paid for in Uni tokens. But if Uni was to run their own Avalanche subnet, they could build it in such a way where that Uniswap token was used in multiple different functionalities. So now, if I want to have MetaMask installed or Core Wallet installed, and I want to sign this transaction, it's going to be paid for in Uniswap tokens, or paid for in AVAX, or paid for in whatever other token that I choose to have it paid for, right? USDC. Um, so this was a key stepping stone for really showcasing what the full subnet theory into play could be. Um, Going forward, though, what this also introduced when I mentioned custom validator sets is really giving developers that full authority to build whatever they want, and deciding how their validators are governed. So what that means is that right now the key problem with adoption on the enterprise level, for example, is that many enterprises look at Ethereum, many enterprises look at these permissionless blockchain development platforms, and they look at them and say, "Hey, I don't want I see the value in using blockchain. I see the value that we would gain from using it, but I don't want my data to be publicly available. I don't see how I'd be able to meet certain requirements that would be regulatorily approved if I were to build on this platform. Though I do see the value in it, I don't see how our company can actually build on there." Well, when you give developers and you give companies the ability to decide how they want their validators to be governed, you give them the ability to say, hey, do you want your validators to be restricted to only certain regions or to be globally distributed? Do you want them to be KYC? Do you want to KYC every validator? Do you not want to KYC every validator? Do you want your subnets to be permission, or do you want them to be permissionless? You really give developers full range of what they want to do when they're building, and that to me is really powerful. Where if I'm building on another solution, if I'm building on Ethereum mainnet, for example, I don't have that full range of governance where I can say, hey, I want all my validators on this chain to be a certain way. And so with Avalanche, you have that ability, right? So now when I mentioned much more than just a scaling solution, this is where that starts to come into play, where now enterprises who want to say, let's say, when you mentioned, I want to have a decentralized platform, right? One that is completely permissionless. Um, Well, if you want, you can have, tens of hundreds of thousands of validators on that subnet in a completely permissionless environment. Whereas if I'm an enterprise who says I don't need, 100 validators, I only need 20, and I need them to be all, KYC'd, and I need them to only be present in the US and EMEA, well, you can do that too, right? So it really creates for this fully customizable environment for whatever use case you can really imagine.
Does that create like a little market of validators where certain validators are like, okay, well, I'm willing to be KYC'd and I'm in the EMEA region. And because there's fewer validators that fit those criteria, I would get sort of paid more as a validator in exchange for, like it's just a supply demand thing.
You're very right about that.
That's
And
fun. All right. Well, I'm doxxed. I'll run a doxed validator. No problem.
right. And there's actually some really cool companies that are working on doing stuff like that as well. Kind of like this whole validator marketplace, this idea of shared validators, permission validators. And I think you're going to start to see that concept start to be taking up a little bit more as subnets start to gain more adoption and as they start to see more subnets actually come into play where it's like, okay, hey, I'm a validator, like you said, and I want to be validating for enterprises only, right? And I'm fully KYC, fully AML compliant, and I have no problem with being in a permissioned blockchain. Well, cool. Now I can be validating for 10 different enterprise blockchains, right? And you can start your own little business there. So I think that's really cool, and that idea and concept is something that honestly, when I was jumping into this space, because I looked at it from the developer perspective of, hey, I can really build anything I want and I can decide how my validators are governed. That's really cool. That's actually more permissionless in an idea standpoint, in theory, than not allowing me to govern my validators. Um, but then now these other thoughts came up of, well, I can actually, validate certain, chains versus others and things like that. But that's one of the key calls to action here. Um, Now going forward, now this is something really, really exciting: custom virtual machines. So today, if you're building on ETH mainnet, if you're building on any layer two, for the most part, you're stuck to the EVM, right? You're stuck to having to build with the way that the EVM has certain requirements, has certain guidelines on how you're supposed to build upon there. Using Solidity, things of that nature. Well, the cool thing is with Avalanche, when you launch your own custom subnet, you can choose what VM works better for your solution, right?
Wild.
So,
It's really wild.
right, when you and I discussed the C chain, right, that's the one that everyone knows about. That's the one that everyone is building dApps on currently today. It's EVM compatible due to the fact that that's where most developers are today, right? But for me, for example, I'm a big ZK guy, right? I love zero knowledge, but for the privacy aspect, not really for scaling. But I'm huge into ZK, huge into the idea of uh, privacy first networks. Well, me as a developer, if I want to launch my own custom subnet for whatever use case, and I want it to be fully ZK, compliant, and I want it to be fully ZK powered, I can not only can I build my own virtual machine to power that use case, I can actually use a virtual machine that you built and power that use case. right? Or let's say I don't. Let's say I'm a huge fan of Sui and Aptos, right? And I love the Move VM, and I love the parallel processing that it powers. But I also love Avalanche consensus, right? I want to have the fastest consensus out there today, but I like Move VM. Well, now I can launch my own custom Move subnet with powered by Move VM while still maintaining Avalanche consensus. So at the end of the day, we're going back to this idea of full customizability, right? Where you as a developer, in your hands, you have the ability to launch networks that are completely scalable, completely fully governed in the way that you want them to be governed by taking full control of your validators. And now you're able to build them using whatever virtual machine you want. You can plug and play existing virtual machines, or you can build your own custom virtual machine that fits your use case. And Avalanche actually encourages that. Funny enough, not to show myself here, but I was playing around with that ZK idea, and I was like, hey, could I actually do this? Could I actually build my own custom virtual machine? I really haven't seen anyone do that yet. And I did. It was very basic. It's very like it's only able to transfer assets back between single accounts, multi assets. It has some governance in there as well. It's able to maintain the network state. But the fact that I was able to build that and that I can use it in production, even though it might not be fully production ready for a high level DApp, the fact that I can do that today is very cool, right? And I see that functionality for developers going forward to be really huge, where maybe not everyone wants to build their own virtual machine, but the fact that you can, it is something that I don't have the ability to do on Ethernet. It's not something that I have the ability to do with on a lot of other app chain solutions. And plugging and playing VMs, of course, that's actually really cool. Like Spaces VM, Wasm VM, Move VM. I'm actually a huge fan of Move. The fact that I could plug and play a Move VM into a subnet, having ultra fast consensus, and then take control of my validators. To me, that's like, hey, I can literally launch my own custom blockchain at the end of the day, right? That's like it's its own alt layer one, for an example, but without having headwinds of doing so. So that's the second main call to action. Now, going a little bit deeper into that, when you're able to look at your VM layer, define the way that your block is, like the contents that are within your block, the way that your state is transitioning, what APIs you want exposed to the blockchain, and then what data from that is persisted to the disk, is something I can confidently say that no other solution gives you the flexibility to do, but Avalanche does, right? And that, again, it's all coming from a developer perspective, right? From a developer perspective, giving us the ability to build whatever we want the way we want it is, at the end of the day, what permissionless building means, right? It's not, hey, here's the validators that you have to work with, here's the virtual machine that you have to be building on. Now go and build your permissionless app, versus, oh, you want to build here, you can have as many validators as you want, or as little validators as you want. You can have it be permission or permissionless, built with whatever virtual machine you want. You can build your own virtual machine if you so choose. It's something that I think is really powerful, and I think that a lot of other solutions, once they start seeing this actually come into play, are going to start having to catch up to. At least that's my opinion. And here's something even cooler, right? If you thought that wasn't cool already, Avalanche is also language agnostic, right? So this is something where it's a little bit more slowed pace, in the sense where I can't build my own SDK on top of Avalanche, but the team themselves, Ava Labs, is actually pumping out new SDKs where you can build virtual machines on Avalanche in whatever language you so choose. So you're not restricted to the language of their choice, but you're able to build in really whatever ones that you have available to you. So initially, Golang was the initial SDK that was released, and this presentation is a little bit outdated because it says Rust SDK was launched last week, but this happened like 2 months ago. But they have the Rust SDK. I heard some whispers of a Move SDK on the way. I've heard some whispers of a TypeScript SDK on the way. right? It's at that point, you're not restricting developers to have to first learn a new language, but you're giving them the option to build the way they want. Again, right? That's the whole basis of everything we've been talking about, where it's, hey, I want to build the way that I want. I prefer that virtual machine that I discussed with you earlier. I built that in Rust because that's what I'm more familiar with. I really don't have much experience with Golang. Um, so imagine now where a Solana developer who's been building on Solana for months and months now wants to kind of transition into a new blockchain where they can't really do that because it's very few blockchains that actually support Rust,
Yeah.
development base layer.
Maybe Fuel, and that's not even live as a mainnet or as a roll up anywhere yet.
Right. But I'm actually really excited for Fuel. I'm really excited for modular blockchains. Just had to throw that out there since you mentioned it.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, it's hard to find a platform that's language agnostic, right? And I wouldn't go so far to say it's fully language agnostic yet, because again, they're still pumping out SDKs. But the fact that that's something that they value and something that they're pushing out is what I view as that idea of customizability again, and giving power back to developers. And now here's where everything gets tied together, right? Again, this presentation is a little bit outdated because it says the teleporter, but they officially released the name of what it's going to be called. It's called AWM, Avalanche Warp Messaging. What that means is when you're building all these different subnets, right? We mentioned this circle, right, of outside of the main chain. It's really cool that we have all these different app chains. It's really cool that you can build them whatever way they want, whatever way you want. But if they're not able to be connected to each other, it really
Mm-hmm.
doesn't do much, right?
Right.
But what's really cool is that Avalanche is focusing on this thing called AWM, Avalanche Warp Messaging, which allows these subnets to be able to be interoperable with each other, meaning that now if you have a certain token, certain assets on one chain and one subnet, you can transfer them to another subnet that has completely different functionality. You can send messages between subnets. You can create a cross messaging protocol that goes from subnet to subnet. Um, and what that does is it, instead of creating these fragmented app chains, it creates what I like to call a network of networks, right? That are all connected with each other. So not only do you have full customizability, but you have full interoperability as well. And as a developer, I'm sorry for that. As a developer, you can really, really build the way you want with full interoperability and customizability in mind. And from a developer perspective, I can't imagine something more valuable when I'm building that. Hey, I know one use case that's been thought of right now is this idea of blockchain gaming, right? Where now I have all these assets on one game. Well, what if a completely different game built by a completely different developer, I could potentially transfer assets between these different games, right? If they so allowed it to be, right? Because again, we can control our validators, right? I can also control it to be like, hey, I don't want, assets to be transferred from this game, because I can control that. But if you're in the camp of full interoperability and you position your validators to be able to do so, well, now you can transfer assets between both of those games or both of those dexes or NFT marketplaces, for example. So it's a really powerful functionality. So, and this is what I was where I was going with the idea of the circle, where it's like, here's the Avalanche primary network, here's all these different subnets, and they're all connected to each other. Um, and that's where I coined the term Avalanche network of networks.
Hmm.
And yeah, that kind of does it for me. I mean, usually where I go with at the end of it is, hey, let's build a subnet, because you can actually launch a subnet within 5 minutes,
Oh wow.
locally, of course, a 5 node network within your local machine. But I'm not going to go that deep on today's talk. But I hope that was educational and informative, because for me, again, the reason I got into this space, kind of going full circle now, is this idea of permissionless building, right? This idea of being able to build whatever you want, the way you want it, for the people, for yourself. It's really anyone's environment, right? And so I haven't really found a platform that gives me the ability to do that. until I found Avalanche. And when I really dove deep into their tech and what they're planning on doing, and it's not just roadmap stuff, but they're actually constantly shipping, I got really excited, and I really view that subnets are the future of blockchain development going forward, um, because of the customizability, because of the interoperability, and everything else that we talked about here today.
Usman, this is where you get a standing ovation if we were live and in person, but we're not. So instead, I'll say, if folks want to connect, put me on the left. If folks want to connect with you, I think your Twitter handle's right here at Asim Files, and you're at Chainstack HQ if they're curious about some of what you talked about today, and most importantly, just at a high level, what it seems like Avalanche is trying to do at the infrastructure level, at the protocol level, is to give developers the tools not just to permissionlessly create the smart contracts that we're used to having the flexibility. Oh, it's Turing complete, arbitrary code, amazing. And I have the security guarantees of this decentralized network. Okay, but now let's take the security guarantees of this decentralized network, and instead of making that a monolithic, it's ETH mainnet, it's so secure, we all love it, but we're like trapped by its EVM and so on. Now we've turned all of those pieces into levers that you can start to adjust and be like, well, I want this virtual machine, and I want my validators to be this decentralized, and I want them to have these constraints or not. And that is now, in addition to the contracts, now the virtual machine is something we have control over. The criteria for the validators is something we have control over. So there's like a new category opening in my brain of like what it means to be a biddler in the space. And it seems a little more approachable than it did an hour ago for somebody like me or anyone like you who's like newish to software development, newish to the blockchain space, to say, well, maybe once I get to that little intermediate level of depth and I start to understand, like, okay, the constraints of developing on ETH mainnet, here are some things I don't like about it, but darn, if only I could have this particular kind of solution. As soon as you hit that point, good news, there's all kinds of people such as the folks at Avalab trying to create SDKs to allow you to use the heavy lifting they've already done in creating this infrastructure and in creating the SDKs to let you use a language of choice from, a small list, but it's more than one, to be able to make something custom to you. That's wild. I didn't know that existed.
Again, it's exciting, right? I think
Huh.
going forward, this is going to push a lot of other solutions that are building, in my opinion, to build in this similar fashion too. Because, like you mentioned, really taking control of the way that you build, whether that's your validator sets, whether that's the languages that you use, or whether that's the VMs that you're not, held to, it's really powerful. And if other chains don't see that or they don't catch up, it's going to be very tough for them to hold developers there. Because from my perspective, being able to plug and play different things that I like about different chains on my own custom chain is a really cool idea. Um, and something I really like the idea of.
There was a question from Beam Me Up Now in the chat. Is there any docs with a comparison between like Cosmos and Avalanche or maybe Polkadot? So I went ahead and, warning, did not read the entire article, but with the bias that this was produced by Avalanche Hub, I think this would be a good starting place. I put a link in the chat for folks that want to get an overview and to understand what Avalanche is doing and be able to apples it with other solutions and how they're similar and different from each other. Because this is an aspect of development that doesn't get a lot of attention, and I appreciate what we're trying to do here to like make developers, even if you never create a subnet, even if you don't understand the difference between virtual machines, to at a conceptual level, because this is Theory Thursdays, what I want folks to walk away with is an understanding that these are some of the pieces that are being played with. Because if these pieces were not worth talking about, we might as well just be running AWS buckets. So even if you don't do, or it doesn't feel like you use any of this knowledge, I would like to invite people that are like, I'm not a developer, I don't give a shit about that, to think, well, at least these are conversations that are being had. And if I can understand what some of the pieces are in the conversation, like the scalability trilemma, if you don't know about the scalability trilemma, look it up, because that's something that's fundamental to our space, where people have arguments on Twitter and then they go back to their garage and they build things that allow people to take those arguments and instantiate them as code and begin to run their experiments. We're in the Cambrian explosion of people just trying shit out. And so I appreciate Avalanche and Ava Labs for creating tooling to allow people to try shit out. It's kind of where we're at. Who knows what's going to happen? This is the experimental phase. A lot of stuff's going to come. It's going to go. It's going to grow. It's going to die. That's to be expected. But I appreciate folks like you for trying to make it that much easier for other folks, new bidlers, intermediate bidlers, even advanced bidlers, to get in there and try too. So thank you for the invitation for folks to join the Avalanche ecosystem and try some shit out and see what happens. They're going to fuck around and find out.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for your time, Usman. Any parting words for the bidlers who are looking forward to ETH Denver or working on their own things or trying to get a foothold in the space?
Yeah, I'll say two things. I'll start off by saying thank you, Derek, for hosting this, because you've been killer. I've been watching a couple of these. I've been Smart Contract Tuesdays are some of my favorite. You've been killing it. I'm really excited to meet you in person at ETH Denver. Hopefully, if you're not too busy. And but to the builders who are watching this, to the builders who are building their own, apps, having fun, because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right? Having fun. The space is super fun to be a part of. Never be afraid of what you can accomplish, because at the end of the day, we all started from grassroots. Like, me and Derek talked about at the beginning. I came from a non-software background, and now I've been given the opportunity to be able to be a part of a really awesome organization and kind of be able to spit the gospel of technology, right? And I really enjoy that. So if this is your first introduction into this blockchain space, if you've been here for a while, there's so much that you can accomplish. We're so early. So never underestimate yourself and never underestimate the technology. If you guys see me at ETH Denver, please say hi. I'm always looking to help. I might be mentoring. I don't know, potentially, wink, wink, right? So that's gonna be pretty cool too. And I'm looking forward to what everyone builds the build-a-thon.
Sweet. Thanks again for joining us, Usman. Until next time, please join me in sending everyone off with a big bye.
Bye.
Bye, Beam. Bye, Gina. Bye, Brett, if you're still here. Bye, Andre. And bye, everyone else. See you next time. Oh, yeah, and Usman, I always forget to do this. Usman mentioned a moment ago gaming and metaverse type solutions as an example use case of subnets. Join us tomorrow. I'm going to kill you, Usman. That shit's way too loud. Join us tomorrow on Fridays, Raise Your Spork stream, where we dig into the first of 5 tracks. Alpha, we're digging into 2 of the 5 tracks. But one of the tracks we're digging into tomorrow is gaming the metaverse and NFTs. So if that's a use case that's interesting to you, we might want to revisit this, what we've learned today, and dig into Ava Labs more as we learn about what kinds of projects will be successful or good candidates for finalists, I should say, at ETH Denver in the gaming, metaverse, and NFTs track. So with that, you know where to find us, at the Derrek on Twitter and at Asim Files. Goodbye, everyone. Until next time.